just want to say to our friend over here, we welcome you today to our worship. You don't know how much we welcome you. One of the hard lessons in life to learn is that sometimes life is just not fun. We like to have fun, don't we? I like to have fun. But some experiences in life are not fun. Believe it or not, some trips we take are not fun, are they? The phone call comes that a relative who lives several hundred miles away has died suddenly, and immediately you start making plans for a trip, packing the suitcases in the car and all that goes along with traveling. But missing is the usual excitement which comes in anticipation of a trip, because you know this trip is not going to be fun. The company executive who may have had opportunity to travel all over the world for business and usually able to sneak in a little pleasure, this time is traveling to another state to bear the bad news that the plant he's going to be visiting will be shutting down, and he knows the news will mean hundreds of jobs lost, families thrown into financial crisis. He looks at his wife as he packs his suitcase and says, this trip is not going to be fun. Or perhaps many of us have been on one of those trips where before you even left the driveway, something was said, maybe inadvertently, maybe intentionally, whatever it was, touched a raw nerve. Feelings were hurt, and the several-hour car ride ensued in an atmosphere of icy, stone-cold silence. Now, not that Gene and I have ever had a trip like that, but not a fun trip. Some of you may know what it's like to take a trip in the back seat of a patrol car, on the way to somewhere where you're going to spend a little vacation but not by choice. And it's not a fun trip. One gets the idea that the trip upon which Jesus is about to head out is not a fun trip. This is not a vacation trip. This is not pleasure travel. The message says Jesus had to gather up his courage and to steel himself for the journey to Jerusalem. Now, we who have privilege to the whole story, to the unfolding of the story, know in hindsight why it was Jesus was not necessarily looking forward to this trip. For one thing, Jesus had a strong sense that this was a trip from which he would not come home. He would end up on the outskirts of Jerusalem in a despicable place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. You know the story. No, this was not a fun trip. Along the way will be conflict and sorrow and despair, and yes, even death. The question that hangs over this passage, this start of a journey that leads to a cross, is why? Why go on this trip? I mean, come on, Jesus. You're smart enough to read the writing on the wall. You know that what you are about and the message you are delivering and the challenge you are making to people in authority about their ridiculous and shallow and hateful and bigoted ways, that is, in the end, probably going to get you killed. So why go? Stay in Galilee. Set up yourself a pretty little ministry center there by the seashore and hang out with the people who already like you and think you're the best thing since sliced warm bread and butter. Jesus, you could do lots of good there without going to Jerusalem, to the seat of absolute power that corrupts. And if you go there, do you really have to mention how corrupt things are? Just keep your head down. Lie low, Jesus. No doubt Jesus got advice like that, but would not take it. Not even from his family. His mother, even. They came to talk Jesus out of this dangerous journey, and he ends up saying something like, "Who are my mother and my brothers but the ones who do the will of my Father in heaven?" He will not listen to their reason. His mind is made up. He is going on this trip, and he knows it will not be fun. He heads in a direction that he knows is going to lead to suffering. And in the estimation of some of his followers, he's sabotaging his own track record of success. Not only is he heading to Jerusalem, but the route he takes to get there has him and his disciples going through Samaria. Samaria, for a Jew, was the wrong side of town. There was historically deep hostility between the Samaritans and the Jews over the issue of where the center of religious power resided. And the place to which Jesus is headed, Jerusalem, represents the enemy to the Samaritans. So it is not surprising that when his advance team comes in to the Samaritan village and there's no red carpet laid out, there's not even a friendly wave, there's no food offered or no place of rest provided. Well, the disciples are peeved about that. Or probably it may even been that they're that P word that I won't say in the polite setting of the pulpit. And James and John asked Jesus. They said, "Master, do you want us to call down a bolt of lightning and fry all these people?" He could have done it. It's more than irritating. It's insulting to be the subject of hospitality. In those days, there was no stopping at the McDonald's. You depended upon the hospitality of strangers to help you on your journey. Being the one not invited to the party, or being the one left out of the family reunion, well, there's nothing much more hurtful than that, is there? And to be treated that way by people that you may think you're better than, well, that's even worse. A few years back, at the South Carolina United Methodist Annual Conference, we, one afternoon, devoted the whole conference to what they called a great day of service. Folks who had come to the conference were invited to join in a variety of community service projects, some of them done at the conference center itself, but many of them done in places all over the city of Florence, South Carolina. I participated in a prayer walk around the downtown area of Florence. We walked in groups of 4 or 5, and we would stop at a building or a location and pray for the people who worked in the building or lived in the house or labored on the street corner. One of the instructions we were given before we set out on the walk was that we were not to give out money to anyone who asked for it. Well, sure enough, near the end of our walk, we stopped outside a convenience store to pray for those who worked there and customers who came there. And a man saw us bowing our heads to pray together, and he came up to us and he said, "Could you spare a few dollars?" Well, we said, "No." "Well, I need a few dollars to do this." "Well, no, we can't do that. We're not here to give out money, but we'll be very happy to pray for you." And he said to us, he said, "Well, I believe the Bible has something to say about how to deal with people like you." And he took off his flip-flops and he shook the dust off of them and he turned around and headed the other way from us. Well, we godly United Methodists were aghast by his rejection of our offer to pray and his use of the Bible against us. Well, I'm sure he was just wanting drugs or booze, we rationalized, and he may have been, I don't know. James and John are indignant that they were treated this way, Jesus and his followers, by Samaritans of all people. They're incensed by the rejection, but Jesus will not join them in their righteous indignation. I came across this observation about this incident at Samaria. Reverend Kenneth Samuel from Victory for the World Church in Stone Mountain, Georgia, said Jesus did nothing because, you see, Jesus was able to move beyond his own hurt in being rejected to deal with the hurt of those who had rejected him. He said people who live their lives rejecting other people are oftentimes people who are deeply damaged themselves. The Samaritans rejected Jesus out of their own ignorance and out of their own fear. And ignorance and fear continue to provide the fuel that feeds prejudice and bigotry today. The Samaritans, they didn't know anything about Jesus. They only knew they only thought they knew what Jesus was about, because, you see, they had identified Jesus as a Jew, and so they categorized Jesus and they put him in a prejudgment that he was this way or thought this thing or whatever, and they evaluated his character by his associations. And they assumed that Jesus had the same contempt for them that other Jews had for them. And so they rejected Jesus out of ignorance of who Jesus really was and out of fear of the group to which he associated. You and I have rejected others, or have been rejected by others for the same reasons. But before we reject anyone because of the group to which he or she may belong, why not give every person a chance to demonstrate the content of his or her character apart from their assumed identity as being a part of this or that group? Most of our prejudgments about each other or about groups in the world are simply wrong. Jesus won't treat people according to their categories. He knows those prejudgments rarely, if ever, hold true. Jesus is going to Jerusalem, and it's not a fun trip, and it's not going to further his career or make him any money or advance the status of his group. So why is he going? Why go? Why take on something that has the potential for such great loss? Why risk it? Why now? The time doesn't seem right. He asks those who are with him to join him on the journey. Follow me, he says. Come along with me. Now, it's not a very enticing invitation in some respects. Jesus says we won't be staying at the Embassy Suites. We won't even be at the Motel 6. For birds have their nests and foxes have their holes, but the Son of Man has not a place to lay his head. He knows what some of you have been through. A couple of folks expressed their support, but they all seem to have very good excuses as to why they can't go now. My dad has just died. I got to go bury him. Another one said, well, I need to take care of some family business and say my goodbyes. No, says Jesus. No. Leave the dead to bury their own dead. Can't live in the past. The work of the kingdom is more important. Wow, that seems harsh, doesn't it? Very harsh for Jesus to say. You know, we live in a world that gives very high importance to catering to individual wants and needs and desires. Individualism, we call it, and it's a strong American value. Individual rights, individual privileges, the value of every individual, pursuit of happiness for every individual. But that's not necessarily such a high value for Jesus. Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and Jesus asks his followers to go to Jerusalem because Jesus believes to do so is the will of the Father, and it's for the good of the kingdom. Now we know sitting here 2,000 plus years later on the other side of this trip that Jesus took, Jesus was going for the good of all of us, was he not? For the good of the whole world, for the most famous perhaps verse in all of the scriptures is this one that I bet most of you memorized as a child. And when I start the words, you can join me. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus went on this trip and he did what he did all the way to Calvary for the common good of us all. He put aside his own individual wants and needs and desires, and even those of his followers, and said we must do this for the common good of the world. Looking around our world today and the problems and challenges we face, maybe working for the common good is more important than satisfying our individual wants and needs and desires. It's hard to do, isn't it? Put aside what we want, or what we feel like we need, to do what's best for all of us. It's hard to do. Like it or not, we are all in this together. Is that true? Are we really all in this together? Do we need to look out for each other? And for what benefits the world as a whole? We all bear responsibility for the problems in the world. We all have to be part of the solution to those problems. The time for blaming others and saying it's not my fault, make them change. Get rid of them. Build a wall so they can't get in. It sounds good, doesn't it? Makes us feel good. Jesus says, it doesn't work. We're all in this together. Will we make sacrifices in terms of our individual wants, needs, and desires for the common good of all God's children in this generation and in the generations to come? How many of us think about what we do today affecting the future of those who will come after us? You know, the trip may not always be fun. It's just not. Sometimes it is, oftentimes it is, but not always. But the work that needs to be done involves nothing less than the salvation of the world. Would you pray? It's hard for us, Lord, sometimes to read the words of Jesus, the stories about Jesus, the choices Jesus made, and what he did, and not to see them or hear them or understand them through the filter of our own times and our own mindsets. So we want to turn Jesus into the guy that's the champion for what we want, for what we think we need as individuals, as our own group. But Jesus says, come follow me, even when the journey's not fun. And together, we shall come to see the salvation of all the world. It's a hard perspective for us to take, Lord. But you've called us to nothing less than that. So help us this day to lay aside our individual wants, desires, and needs and surrender it all unto you, is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.